Now, Nick's a consultant surgeon who spent the last 15 years working with hospitals in Gaza and was in fact due to travel there this week. We're also going to be speaking to William Bell, who's head of Middle East policy and advocacy from Christian Aid. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Let me start with you, Nick. I mean, obviously you're extremely familiar with Gaza, with the hospitals, with the way that the place runs. Obviously, the news about the bombing of the hospital is appalling, isn't it? It's just devastating. So what are your thoughts? What can you tell us about it?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me on today, Vanessa. Yeah, the situation's appalling, as you've described. I've spoken to myself and my colleagues, spoken to colleagues, friends in Gaza hourly throughout the last week, but I've spoken to 3 or 4 people this morning about the events of yesterday. One doctor who was actually works at Ahli hospital, and 2 further doctors who work at Shifa hospital who've had to take many of the injured patients from the hospital that was attacked yesterday.
Yes.
And speaking to the doctors at Shifa hospital, they were overwhelmed by the number of victims that came to them. They haven't got the capacity to deal with the amount of trauma patients they've received over the last week. They're not able to treat any other patients other than trauma patients, and they haven't got the resources to do that. Their fuel ran out last night, so the generators failed, so they were not allowed to run any equipment that required electricity. They managed to get a bit of fuel this morning, and it's about to run out this afternoon. And that will, of course, drastically limit any operations they can do and any ability to treat the majority of their patients. So the healthcare system is on the brink of collapse, and it's a quite devastating situation they find themselves in.
In the past, when you have gone to work in hospitals in Gaza, what have you found in terms of quality of life for people living there, what it's like to be a citizen in a place which is ruled by a terrorist organisation like Hamas, whether there's any freedom, whether there's any quality of life? What have you seen?
I see a remarkably happy population there. And one thing that struck me every time I visited is how hopeful they are. And they remain very hopeful that the situation will improve. Their hospitals are full of extremely talented surgeons that I've worked with and other doctors and nurses, often unpaid for 6 months at a time, but dedicated to trying to work as hard as they can to treat their patients. So that they are a remarkable population who have an extremely difficult life there.
I mean, you just talked about the generators pegging out at hospitals. We can all pretty much work out what that means and how dangerous it must be for various patients who are on all kinds of equipment that needs to be fueled to keep them alive for a start. We can imagine how unbelievably frightening that must be, how devastating and everything else. But we're also hearing, the more we talk about this, the more experts we discuss this with, about the enormous tunnel network underneath the cities in Gaza, apparently flooded with light at all times. So the population quite often powerless, with no power, with power cuts, and goodness knows what going on beneath the surface. Have you ever been told about this or been aware of this?
No, and as you can imagine, I'm not a politician. I'm a humanitarian. I have heard nothing about that, but I do speak regularly to many friends and colleagues who I've known for years and trust implicitly. And when they tell me the electricity isn't there and the generators are run out and there's no fuel, I am in no doubt they're telling the truth.
No, I'm sure. So as a doctor, and as a doctor who's worked in these hospitals, what do you fear or what do you imagine will ensue in the next few days?
Well, I think unless aid is allowed in, the healthcare system will collapse completely and they will be unable to treat patients at all. If they haven't got any fuel, as you pointed out, Vanessa, they will no longer be able to ventilate patients. The vast majority of surgery will not be feasible without any form of energy, electricity and from the generators. So I think the healthcare system, which is on the brink of collapse, will collapse. And that will lead to many, many more deaths than we've seen now. So there needs to be aid allowed in, there needs to be water, there needs to be fuel, there needs to be medicines. They've run out of blood products, they've run out of surgical equipment. Aid needs to be allowed in immediately, and there needs to be a ceasefire to allow that.
Well, we know that the Israelis have said that aid will be allowed in. following, we believe, the discussions with President Biden today. So there has to be, therefore, that tiny cause for some kind of optimism, doesn't there? If they can get aid through, as you say, then they might be able just about to carry on functioning. And I do appreciate your joining me on the program. Just tell me, if you wouldn't mind, Doctor, all the years that you've been going to hospitals in Gaza and working there, why have you felt the pull and the desire to help out there? What is it about the place that has led you to want to do that?
I'll address your first point first. Of course, we all welcome any aid going in there, but I think the amount of aid that can get in through the Rafah crossing will be inadequate. Of course, it's welcomed, but it will never be sufficient to get the healthcare system up and running again to save these patients. There needs to be aid let in from the Israeli side as well. To address your second question, they are a remarkable people. As I think I said earlier, I've made many friends out there. I go out without any political agenda at all. I go out purely for humanitarian reasons. I've made many friends, and I think they are remarkable people who need help in order to progress their healthcare system. And that is what I am dedicated to doing.
Dr. Nick Maynard, thank you very much indeed.